All right, everybody, it's Mr. Slyway. I'm back for your video lesson on the Pacific Theater, or the Pacific War portion of World War II. So we're going to go ahead and get started and cover as much as we can. We're going to have an assessment coming up soon on all of World War II. So make sure that you pay attention and get ready for that. All right, so here we go. The Pacific Theater. The Philippines get invaded by Japan in 1942. All right, Japan is trying to become an aggressor, much like Germany, and expand their territory. In the Philippines, we have General MacArthur. He has to withdraw. All right, he's got to back up to the Bataan Peninsula. Manages to hold off attacks until April. His men had to eat donkeys and monkeys and all sorts of things because they were starving. But eventually, the U.S. has to surrender in the Philippines. All right. Now, MacArthur is ordered to immediately evacuate to Australia, where it's safe. But in doing so, he has to leave quite a few of his men in the Philippines. They are captured and then forced on what is called or known as the Bataan Death March. All right. About 30,000 of them are going to die as they march 50 miles from the Bataan Peninsula to the detainment facility that the Japanese had created. All right, so it's basically a mass death march. All right, Japan is going to take control of the Philippines. It's going to be a big deal for them because it's going to take away a kind of a strategic location for our ability to monitor what Japan is doing and what's going on. At the same time, Colonel James Doolittle, all right, Colonel James Doolittle is doing flights over Japan, high flights over Japan, taking a look at what's going on, all right? And he decides or comes up with the decision that the Japanese islands are currently vulnerable to attack. All right, he lets President Truman know that because Japan's trying to expand, because they're moving into the Philippines and elsewhere, he believes that the mainland of Japan and the islands around Japan are vulnerable to some sort of attack, whether it be naval or aerial. All right, that's going to be a really big deal. We'll get into that as we get closer and closer to the atomic bombs. In 1942, May, you're going to get what's called the Battle of the Coral Sea. This is going to be kind of the first step in that vulnerability that I just mentioned. What's going to happen there is you are going to have an aerial battle between the Japanese and the United States. There will be no ship-to-ship contact, but this is going to prevent the invasion of Australia. So it stops the Japanese from invading Australia by creating a buffer in the Coral Sea between Australia and the Japanese. All right, it's going to be a pretty big deal that's going to allow the United States to have a launching point for the remainder of this Pacific War. Okay, in June of 1942, 1 month later, we're going to get the Battle of Midway. This is really important. Okay, it's going to be the worst defeat for Japan. They're going to lose 4 aircraft carriers, over 300 planes. Mass casualties for the Japanese. All right, it's going to be the tipping point of the Pacific Theater, and it's going to be the moment in which the Japanese begin to lose kind of military power in the Pacific. Okay. After that, in August, you're going to get the Battle of Guadalcanal, invaded by the U.S. The U.S. are going to invade Guadalcanal as a place to have an airstrip, a place to launch attacks against the Japanese in their new policy. That new policy, the Pacific strategy, is going to be known as island hopping. The idea is that if we can take over smaller islands closer and closer to Japan, we can build military bases. We can build naval and air force bases as launching points for our ability to launch fighter jets or bombers or whatever it may be to get closer and closer to Japan. So we would hop from small island to small island, taking those islands over on the way to Japan. Okay? The leader of this policy is going to be Admiral Chester Nimitz. We'll end up naming an aircraft carrier after him, the USS Nimitz. But he will be the leader in the Pacific under the policy of island hopping. Okay? In October of 1944, we're going to get the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The Japanese are controlling the Philippines. And guess who returns, right? MacArthur, still angered by the loss, by the Bataan Death March of all of his men, returns to the Philippines and full-on attacks to retake the Philippines. The Japanese become desperate. They're running out of weaponry, so they begin this policy of what's called kamikaze bombing. It's where the Japanese convince kamikaze pilots, or pilots in their Air Force, that dying for their country, for their cause, is the greatest thing that they can do. So what they do is they fly their planes into American carriers, destroyers, and battleships. All right, I posted a short video of this on the mainstream on Google Classroom, so you can see what exactly occurred. Okay, it was seen as a great honor for Japanese pilots to die this way. But it also shows that Japan's becoming really desperate. All right, they're running out of weaponry, they're running out of ideas, they're running out of the ability to combat the United States. Shortly after, February to March of 1945, you're going to get the Battle of Iwo Jima. Very famous. If you go to Washington, D.C., there is a lot dedicated to this. If you're ever interested, you can go and check that out. All right. But the Battle of Iwo Jima we invaded the area, Iwo Jima, as a base for bombers. You can't fly a bomber off of an aircraft carrier. It's too heavy, and it causes too many issues. So you have to be able to take off from the land. So our goal was that if we could take Iwo Jima, we could fly bombers, which would allow us to drop mass tonnage of bombs on Japan. Okay, obviously that's going to become a really big deal as we move closer and closer to the emergence of the atomic bomb. All right, about 6,000 Marines are going to die during this battle, but so will about 18,000 Japanese soldiers. So it has a lot of casualties, but it allows us to have that ability to, again, launch large-scale bombings from the ground. All right. Okinawa. This is going to be kind of a major moment for Truman to understand the possibilities of casualty during World War II, during the Japanese conflict. All right. The Battle of Okinawa, April through June of 1945, is going to be a large casualty situation on both sides. About 50,000 U.S. soldiers are going to be killed in a short period of time, in about 2.5 months. About 110,000 Japanese soldiers are going to be killed. It's very costly on both sides. It's a very slow battle. It's an extremely violent battle with a lot of hand-to-hand combat, and it shows the possible high casualties of invading Japan. It gives Truman the idea that if we go in on a ground invasion of Japan, we are probably going to lose a lot of individuals. In fact, the estimates are somewhere between 1 million to 2 million on both sides, the Japanese side and the American side, if we attempt a ground invasion of Japan. Also, there were about 1,900 kamikaze pilots used in this battle. It's excessively violent. And Truman begins wondering, whether or not it's actually worth invading Japan. That's going to become an interesting question in July of 1945 at the Potsdam Conference. Once again, the big three, okay, Stalin, Truman, and Britain are going to meet and have a discussion about, kind of where we're going from this point on. Truman, while at the conference, is going to be told that we have produced, under the Manhattan Project, a working and viable atomic bomb. He doesn't tell Stalin. Stalin finds out because of spies in the United States eventually. But Truman kind of keeps this card in his back pocket and comes out with the statement to Japan that you either surrender or face utter destruction. Japan doesn't know why, but Truman has this mass threat to them. Surrender immediately or face utter destruction. Japan, trying to maintain their honor, the emperor refuses to surrender. All right? So on August 6th of 1945, we dropped the first of 2 atomic bombs, all right, on Hiroshima. Instantly, 70,000 people die and are vaporized. 30,000 will die later on from injury, from radiation poisoning, and other issues. Once again, we issue the ultimatum of surrendering or being destroyed, the use of another atomic bomb. The Emperor of Japan still refuses to surrender. So 3 days later, we drop another atomic bomb on Nagasaki, effectively destroying the island. Japan realizes that we can continue to do this, that they have no way to combat it, and there's absolutely nothing that they can do. So on August 14th of 1945, Japan surrenders. All right. August 15th will be known as Victory in Japan Day and will effectively end the U.S. involvement in World War II. All right. So we're going to have an assessment coming up soon. Keep studying, keep your work, get it done, and then we will move on to the Cold War. Hope everybody's doing all right. See you later.